If all goes according to plan, tomorrow night all 30 MLB teams will play a game on the same day for the first time in 12 days. Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Brown, and welcome into today's edition of Around the Bases, live streaming on the 110 Sports Network at 110sportsmedia.com/live, as well as twitch.tv/110sports. Great to be with you here on this Thursday, August 6th. Plenty to talk about, of course. As always, the Cardinals are set to resume play this weekend. The Marlins are back on the field playing games and doing well. We'll talk about that and much more on today's episode of ATB Live. And a reminder as we get underway here on this Thursday that all 110 Sports Network broadcasts are available on demand at 110sportsmedia.com. Just click on the video tab or follow 110 Sports on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts for all of our broadcasts on demand anytime. So, we've got a lot to talk about today. As I mentioned, let's just go ahead and dive right into our rundown for today's broadcast. We're going to go ahead and start, as always, with our top four of the day. We will dive into the Cardinals situation, which we talked about, of course, on Tuesday. The second major outbreak in Major League Baseball. The Cardinals are set to resume play soon. We will discuss that. Also, the changes to the COVID-19 protocols that have been agreed to between the Major League Baseball Players Association and the league. Then we'll jump into talking about some historically good starts for four teams, including the Yankees and the Twins. Then we'll jump into a quick note on the top prospects list that was updated, a big top prospects list updated yesterday. We will discuss that, some notable names on that list. Then, as always, we'll dive into some news and notes of the day. And then we'll get into Leaderboard Watch, which is looking at some early season statistical standouts. This is an article I wrote. It's up on 110sportsmedia.com right now, looking at some early season statistical standouts for teams and players, and what does it mean? Is it too soon to tell? Is it spell trouble? Is it a really good sign? We'll discuss some of those coming up, and then we'll dive into some odds and ends near the end of the broadcast, and as always, on Thursday shows, we will look at what's on deck, some interesting matchups over the weekend, and storylines to look out for in the days ahead. So let's go ahead and dive right into our top four for the day, and we are going to start with the COVID-19 situation, the outbreak involving the St. Louis Cardinals, and the latest information there. The Cardinals received negative tests from rapid COVID-19 tests and returned to St. Louis yesterday, participating in workouts at Busch Stadium. As mentioned on Tuesday's show, the team's outbreak to this point has involved 13 cases, 7 players, and 6 staff members. The hope, of course, is that is the full extent of the Cardinals' outbreak, and so far, it appears to be that way. Manager Mike Shildt of the Cardinals talking to reporters yesterday, saying that he believes the virus was picked up in a normal, everyday manner, saying, quote, somebody asymptomatic got it and brought it into the clubhouse. Shildt said the team probably won't interact at all moving forward, saying, quote, if you're not in the lineup, you're not in the dugout. Shildt also said, as far as the situation, he said he thinks reports to the contrary that the group was doing anything wrong are pretty irresponsible, quite honestly. There have been reports from national media outlets that Cardinals players had visited a casino and other actions, but there has been, and Cardinals president of baseball operations John Mozeliak said a few days ago, no evidence to support that at this point. The Cardinals are slated to host the Cubs tomorrow, assuming that no positive tests come back today or tomorrow. The Cardinals are slated to host the Cubs tomorrow in a 3-game series, to begin a 3-game series. They will be without a number of players, including catcher Yadier Molina and shortstop Paul DeJong, as well as starting pitcher Carlos Martinez, who are all placed on the injured list. And again, if that does happen, assuming, fingers crossed, that does happen, that game is able to take place tomorrow, it would mean, as mentioned, that all 30 MLB teams will be playing on the same day for the first time in nearly 2 weeks. As I mentioned, like the Marlins, the Cardinals roster will look very different when they return. Prior to returning in Baltimore this week, the Marlins placed 11 players on the injured list and recalled or activated a number of players to replace them on the active roster. So, again, fingers crossed, this time tomorrow will just be a few hours away from the start of 15 games being played on the Major League Baseball schedule for Friday. So that's your update to start our top four. Just a quick update on where things stand right now. Our second item today, according to multiple reports, including from Jared Diamond of the Wall Street Journal, Major League Baseball and its Players Association have agreed to several changes to the COVID-19 operations manual. The following protocols are going into effect today and will remain in place for the rest of the season. And according to Diamond, players and staff must wear face coverings over their nose and mouth at all times, anywhere inside a ballpark, including the bullpen and the dugout, except for the players who are on the field. Home teams are required to provide outdoor covered spaces for visiting teams. Players and staff must wear masks at all times while inside hotels except while alone in their rooms. Traveling parties must be limited to essential personnel. Players and staff must notify their club compliance officer anytime they leave the hotel while on the road. And finally, players and staff are prohibited from visiting bars, lounges, restaurants, and malls. That was reportedly some of the protocols which are going into effect today, which was sent in a memo to teams and players just a few days ago. Now, Diamond noting that anyone found in violation of these new protocols may face significant punishments, including a potential ban for the remainder of the season. So the Players Association acknowledging in the statements that are going out to players that this is a strong step, but that they believe it's necessary to allow baseball to continue and the season to be played out in 2020. And I don't have any extreme reaction to this other than that seems good. I mean, it's good that these protocols are being put in place. I think, from what's been reported in a lot of cases, some of these protocols were being observed or these actions were already taking place for several teams. But, putting it in writing, being really clear and really, also just the idea that they are threatening is not the right word, but they're saying, look, if you violate these protocols, you could be banned for the rest of the season. So take this seriously. So, you could also argue this sort of accountability sort of system, this sort of, should have been in place originally, but certainly a good step that Major League Baseball is taking. No real hot take on that from me on that situation. This information coming last night after MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred spoke to ESPN's Jesse Rogers yesterday about the league's protocols and what he's seen with the Marlins and the Cardinals situations. As for those outbreaks, Manfred said the spread of the virus in both organizations can be traced back to lapses in protocols. Manfred saying, quote, "We believe in the two serious outbreaks that we can identify deviations from the protocols that resulted in the situations that we had. The key is vigilance. It's vigilance on the part of the commissioner's office, club officials, players, and everyone involved in the game." Now, I will say that is a much better statement than what we heard from Manfred over the weekend when he basically said, "I'm not a quitter and the players need to do better." What I just read a minute ago there, that is a much better statement. Vigilance on the commissioner's office, club officials, players, everyone involved in the game. So that is a much better statement from Manfred. That's not to say I'm all of a sudden saying he is commissioner of the year, because that is not the case, but that is what he needed to say from the start, which is sort of a growing trend for Manfred when he comes out, says something ridiculous, puts his foot in his mouth, and then eventually, in his second and third interview after that, he'll say the right thing. But it's becoming a pattern where he does it repeatedly. Eventually, he says what he should have just said initially, but it's by the time you say the right thing, if you've already said the wrong thing in a very public setting, upsetting players and fans and journalists and the whole situation, then saying the right thing later isn't exactly doing that much good. And also, Manfred hasn't been acknowledging in these sorts of situations that, hey, I misspoke before, I didn't mean to imply this, or I know there's, or addressing the mistake he made before. That's never been something that I've seen him do in recent weeks, which really, again, accountability for what you say as well, even if you get it right eventually. Now, Manfred also said he believes the league's protocols are working pretty well overall. Manfred telling ESPN, I think the vast majority of our players have done a really good job adhering to what are difficult protocols. They're contrary to the way people normally live their lives. He also said that relatively small deviations from the protocols can cause serious problems. That's a reality. Any individual act, you say, wow, not a big deal, but those individual acts can cause problems. And that's what I talked about on Tuesday's show, that the actions of one individual within a team, whether it be a player, a coach, a clubhouse attendant, anyone, can have a major impact on the rest of the team, their families, their community, baseball, other teams. I mean, there's of course big ramifications here beyond just that one person's action. And as we've seen with the Marlins and the Cardinals situations, it seems that we haven't seen spread significantly from team to team, but we've seen spread happen very rapidly within a team. So again, it just underlies the importance of how important it is for everyone to take things seriously as a part of these teams. One other thing that Manfred said that was interesting in his interview yesterday, he said that testing will remain every other day for now, as opposed to every day. Manfred noted that they've thought about doing it more often, but said the advice they've gotten from medical experts is that the additional benefit from testing every day is really, really small due to the incubation period. And I get that somewhat in that, given, like, take for example the Marlins outbreak. Once it had started, I get that in some sense, in that because of the fact the incubation period means that some players who may pick it up won't test positive for several days after that initial player and outbreak starts. So we saw with the Marlins multiple players testing positive, but then it was the period of 4 or 5 days after where there were new positive tests coming in. So I understand that to some extent, that the incubation period means that just if you're testing every day, someone could still be spreading it even if they haven't tested positive yet. Seems to be what the situation is. So I get that in some sense, but also I just think there also could be some benefit to testing every day. You pick things up earlier and avoid having players who may be able to show up positive on a test but aren't going to be tested till the next day, to avoid them going out and playing a game with opponents and with their teammates. So Manfred talking about what the medical experts are saying there, of course, that's important. You want to listen to, of course, what all the medical experts are saying, but that's an interesting situation. Manfred saying they've thought about more testing, but as of now, it's going to remain every other day, for now, at least. One other note, MLB announced late last night that 28-man rosters will be in place for the rest of the season rather than shifting down to 26 as previously planned. So 26 is the new standard roster size going into the season. But then, given the situation, it was agreed to bump it up to 30 to begin the year, and then after 2 weeks it would go down to 28, and then after 2 more weeks it would go down to 26 and remain that way for the rest of the season. So today was actually the day, it was 2 weeks into the season, that it was going to go down to 28. And that is still happening. Major League Baseball teams with their 30-man rosters need to knock it down to 28 today, but they agree that it's not going to go down to 26. It's going to remain 28 the rest of the year, including the playoffs. In addition to the 28-man rosters, clubs can now have up to 5-man taxi squads, and teams will be able to carry 29 players for doubleheaders, which has always been the standard in recent years, that you get to add one player to whatever your roster size is for doubleheaders. Again, no hot take on this. It makes sense. It's logical given the circumstances, especially given the injuries that we've seen, particularly for pitchers. I thought it was really interesting today, and I'm just going to kind of throw this in here as a quick note. Reporting from The Athletic that, or not reporting, really just observing research, that from days 2 through 11 in the MLB season this year, nearly 3 times as many pitchers were placed on the IL compared to the same window a year ago, and more than twice as many compared to any of the previous 10 seasons. So we talked about this a little bit last week, the rate of pitchers going on the IL and how that may be tied to the quick ramp up to the season and the unusual nature of the season. And of course, you can't tie individual injuries in most cases to the unique nature of the season, but it seems like we're seeing a lot of pitcher injuries. And given that, and certain situations for teams with teams handling it very cautiously, players with COVID symptoms being placed on the IL quickly, but then in several cases testing negative, it was not ever they never actually had, it appears, and they're able to come back soon. But just given all the uncertainty, I think it makes sense to have rosters remain at 28, not go down to 26. But not a hot take there. I think it's just generally a good move, and no one really disagrees with that. All right, we'll move on to our third top four item for today. A number of historic starts to begin the season for the Twins, for the Yankees, for the Cubs, and the Marlins. They are all off to historic starts. We're going to touch on each of them here real quick. The Twins are 10-2 now. They are tied for the best 12-game start in franchise history with a Washington Senators team from I believe I don't have the number here, the early 1900s. The Twins defeated Pittsburgh last night for their sixth straight win of the season, which means they're on pace to go 50-12. I'm sorry, 50. They're on, 50-12. 40-year-old Nelson Cruz, who we'll talk about him in just a little bit, he just keeps smashing. And the number 2, 3, and 4 players on the team in RBI behind Cruz are all outfielders. Max Kepler has 4 home runs and 10 RBI. Eddie Rosario has 12 home runs, 8 RBI. Jake Cave has 6 RBI. As for their pitching staff, Jose Barrios has struggled out of the gate. Rich Hill has only pitched 5 innings due to injury, yet the Twins have the 5th best starting pitcher ERA in Major League Baseball. Kenta Maeda is 2-0 with a 1.64 ERA. That was someone I was really high on, getting the chance to pitch for the Twins, not with the Dodgers anymore. And 25-year-old Randy Dobnak entered the year as 7th really on the team's starting pitcher depth chart, but he's been incredible through 3 starts, 2-1 record, 0.60 ERA. He's just given up 1 earned run in 15 innings with a .87 whip. He's been incredible. The Twins also sport the 7th best bullpen ERA in Major League Baseball. As of when I looked last night, that was where they ranked, 2.68 ERA for the bullpen. They're led by Taylor Rogers and Sergio Romo in the back end of that pen. Neither has allowed an earned run yet this season. Twins were my pick for winning the American League title over the Yankees. And, of course, the Yankees have been great as well. We're going to talk about them next. But I'm feeling really good about my enthusiasm for the Twins this year. They just look incredible. Things haven't gone perfectly for them in terms of injuries and situations. Hasn't really gone perfect for anybody, given the amount of injuries we've seen. But the fact that the Twins have done so well to begin the season gives me great confidence in how they're going to do this year. I'm just really excited about this team, continue to be excited about the Twins this season. The Yankees are also off to a historic start. They are 9-2, which is tied for the best 11-game streak in franchise history. It is their best start since 2003. The Yankees started 9-2 6 other times in franchise history, but it's tied for their best start with that. The Yankees split a doubleheader with the Phillies yesterday. Luke Voit homered in Game 2 of that doubleheader to make history, as the Yankees have now homered in each of their first 11 games of the season for the first time in franchise history. Of course, we can't talk about the Yankees without also talking about Aaron Judge. He hit his MLB-leading 7th home run yesterday, his 7th home run in as many games. Luke Voit has 4 home runs on the season. He's picked up right where he left off at first base. Giovanni Urshela also, after an incredible surprise breakout year last year, 3 home runs already for him. And DJ LeMahieu, one of the best pure hitters in baseball, .415 batting average at this point. It's going to come down from that, of course, but he's been incredible. The Yankees are off to a sensational start as well. So, again, this is a team we all knew would be incredible. Aaron Judge is doing incredible things. Of course, health is always a question with them, but they've looked pretty darn good so far. It's going to be fun to see what they do the rest of the season. Another team, a very interesting team, that is off to an incredible start. The Chicago Cubs are 10-2. It's just the 4th time since 1901 that the Cubs have won 10 of their first 12 games. They defeated the Royals last night for their 6th straight win, becoming the first NL team to reach 10 wins. It's an outstanding start for the Cubs in that division, which was expected to be pretty competitive. At this point, they are 4.5 games up on Milwaukee and St. Louis, and 5 games up on Cincinnati. We'll talk more about the Cubs in just a little bit because for a team with a 10-2 record, there is an incredible area of concern with the Cubs, but also a couple other areas that are they've been, you know, there's an area that we expected would be great. It's been great. An area of the Cubs that we expected would be a little concerning. That's been incredible. And an area of the Cubs that we weren't sure about, and it's been historically bad. So we'll talk about the Cubs coming up here in another segment in just a little bit. Finally, the Miami Marlins. You take a look at the MLB standings right now, and the division leaders largely look as you might expect. In the American League, it's the Yankees, the Twins, and then Oakland just slightly above Houston. In the NL, Colorado is just a game up on the Dodgers. And then there's the Chicago Cubs, of course, leading the Central. And then there's the NL East, where the Marlins technically lead the division over a team with 3 more wins. Of course, the Marlins missed a significant period of time, about a week, a little over, yes, a week, due to their COVID-19 outbreak. But they're 5-1 at this point, and they actually technically lead the Braves, who are 8-5 in that division. Miami's 5-1 start is their best 6-game start, tied for their best 6-game start in franchise history, which they also accomplished in 1997, 04, 09, and 2014. Miami swept a doubleheader against the Orioles yesterday, and they've now won 4 straight contests. This pitching staff went 24 straight innings without allowing a run before allowing a run in yesterday's second game. And this is a Marlins team that, as we mentioned a little bit before, significant roster overhaul given their COVID-19 outbreak. A number of veteran journeyman players and young players getting the call, and the Marlins are 5-1 now. Of course, don't expect that to continue. Nobody's expecting the Marlins to be a playoff team, but I mean, strange things have happened. I'm certainly not expecting it, but it's been really fascinating to see the Marlins do so well, especially given the circumstances they've been dealing with this season. Final top 4 note of the day. This is a quick one, not any hot take here as well, just a quick note. MLB Pipeline yesterday released its updated top 100 prospects list. Topping the list is Tampa Bay shortstop infield prospect Wander Franco, who's just 19 years old. The Dodgers infielder Gavin Lux is second. Meanwhile, Chicago White Sox outfielder Luis Robert is third. Of course, he's in the majors now and off to a sensational start. 17 hits through his first 12 games, the most for any White Sox hitter since 1998. Coming in at fourth is Baltimore catcher Adley Rutschman, and San Diego left-handed pitcher Mackenzie Gore rounds out the top 5 of the new prospect update from MLB Pipeline. Those are the prospect rankings you can find at MLB.com. They're one of the more popular, widely cited prospect rankings. A few other notables on the list. Joe Adell, the outfielder who just got the call for the Angels a couple of days ago, he is 6th. Toronto starting pitcher Nate Pearson is 9th. He's off to a strong start in the majors. 5 shutout innings against the Nationals last week in his major league debut. He faces the Braves tonight in Atlanta. So just a quick note on some of those top prospects and the ones who are already making an impact this year in the major leagues. So we're going to go ahead and take our first break of the show. When we come back, we'll go through some news and notes we'll get into the latest with Max Scherzer, who exited his start with the Nationals last night after just 1 inning due to an injury. Fortunately, it does not look too serious. We will discuss that, give you the latest update there. Plus, Juan Soto is back with the Nationals. Latest on Shohei Ohtani's injury, some interesting notes, injury updates, and more. That's coming up. And then we'll dive into our leaderboard watch and talk about some early season statistical standouts and what that might mean. That's coming up next here on ATB Live from 110 Sports. right, welcome back to ATB Live from 110 Sports, streaming on the 110 Sports Network at 110sportsmedia.com/live. I'm Chris Brown. As promised, we are back here with some news and notes for you on this Thursday, August 6th. And we'll start with this. Washington Nationals starting pitcher Max Scherzer exited his start last night against the Mets after just one inning, leading to, of course, some concern about his status. Scherzer said post-game, though, that his exit, was due to a tweaked hamstring, which actually first occurred before his previous start and then flared up yesterday. Fortunately, it is not considered too serious of a situation. It's not an arm-related injury, which, of course, that's good to hear. Scherzer says he's expecting to be ready to go for his next start. Of course, that could change, but again, the good news in a season where we've already seen so many great starting pitchers go down with significant injuries, Scherzer's does not appear to be overly serious. Second news item for you here. After missing the beginning of the season this year following a positive COVID-19 test, Washington Nationals star outfielder Juan Soto made his season debut last night, going 2 for 4 with a double. Talking to the media, Soto said yesterday he doesn't believe he actually ever had coronavirus and said he believes it was a false positive. Soto tested negative numerous times after his one positive test just before opening day and says he's been very cautious about his approach. According to reporting from the Washington Post, this is some information from the Post, quote, those are a few reasons why Soto is sure this all started with a false positive. The other is that he has been cautious and smart away from the park, according to Soto and his teammates. Those close to Soto say he was frustrated by how the public could perceive his positive test result. He didn't want to be seen as reckless or immature contracting the virus at a bar or restaurant in the hours between games. He was hell-bent on clearing his name regardless of whether anyone was judging him. And I bring this up partly because I think this is a really important thing to note. As we've been seeing, finding out with the Marlins situation and then the Cardinals situation, finding out the names of players who've tested positive either because the teams are releasing them or through, reasoning based on players that are then going on the IL and the numbers that are being reported. It's important to note that, again, and we talked about this on Tuesday, it's not a big note, but again, many fans and people online in the Twitter world, jumping to these conclusions that because a player tests positive means that they were somehow reckless or immature or made a mistake or were doing things they shouldn't have been. That is absolutely not necessarily the case at all. So a really important thing to note. That doesn't mean that individual players or coaches or clubhouse personnel and staff haven't made poor choices, but that just means, of course, like we talked about, it only takes one individual who contracts COVID-19 for whatever reason, whether it be not even a reason, either because they made bad choices or not related at all. And of course, it can spread so quickly. So important to note, really important to note, just because a player tests positive doesn't at all mean they've necessarily done anything wrong as far as following protocols or being safe and doing the right thing. So just an important note there. Next item for you. After suffering a forearm strain in his last start, Angels starting pitcher Shohei Ohtani is unlikely to pitch again this season. He, of course, two-way player, also batting. He expressed yesterday to reporters that he still intends to move forward as a two-way player, but he will listen if asked to pick one option. Ohtani is expected to return in the DH role for the Angels as soon as today. Meanwhile, the Athletics, in an interesting note, have as many walk-off grand slams this season as the Pirates have wins. Tuesday night, the A's' Stephen Piscotty broke a 1-1 tie with a grand slam in the ninth inning to win it. It was the A's' second walk-off grand slam this season, which, of course, as you can tell, means the Pirates have just 2 wins this season. Per MLB.com's Sarah Langs, the A's are the first team since the 2018 Cubs with 2 walk-off grand slams in a season. It's the first time in A's history they've had multiple walk-off grand slams in a season. No team has ever had 3. Chicago White Sox placed just promoted infield prospect Nick Madrigal on the injured list with a separated shoulder. The prognosis for him, though, everything considered, is generally positive given the situation, as he could return to action by the end of the month. Next item for you. The Braves on Wednesday placed star second baseman Ozzie Albies on the IL with a right bone contusion. After he tried to play through it for a few days, manager Brian Snitker indicated he may need more than 10 days on the IL as he recovers. The team also placed first baseman Matt Adams on the IL with a left hamstring strain and activated outfielder Nick Markakis from the restricted list. As you may remember, Markakis had opted out of the 2020 season given COVID-19 concerns, but has since opted back in, and he's now back with the Braves on their active roster. Final note for you here, Orioles broadcaster Melanie Newman made history on Tuesday night as the first woman in club history to call a regular season game for the team. Newman also became just the fourth active female broadcaster in Major League Baseball, joining Susan Waldman of the Yankees, Jenny Kavnar of the Rockies, and ESPN's Jessica Mendoza. Newman is also the fourth woman to handle play-by-play duties in a Major League game. The 29-year-old previously held roles on broadcast teams for the Diamondbacks, Rangers, and Red Sox in their farm systems. So congrats to her. Really great to see, and hopefully more to come in terms of women getting the opportunity, of course, and getting those chances to broadcast in Major League Baseball. So great news there for Orioles broadcaster Melanie Newman. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on to our next big segment of the day, and that is Leaderboard Watch. And this is something that I had the idea to write a story about, which you can read the full story right now at 110sportsmedia.com. I was looking at some early season statistics. It's only been, we've only had 2 weeks of the season. At this point, several teams have played fewer games than they should have been due to postponements, due to COVID-19 outbreaks. But I was, people like to, look at the leaderboards all the time and what does it mean? If you look at the leaderboards right now, some of what you'll see on there is to be expected, or at least makes sense. Aaron Judge leading baseball on home runs. Okay, that's fine. That seems logical. But Christian Yelich having one of the worst WAR values in all of baseball, that is shocking. That is not something which you'd expect to see. Obviously, baseball is a game where 162 games are usually played in the regular season. Small sample sizes can result in all sorts of different outcomes. Players have incredible, 2-week stretches and horrible 2-week stretches, and things even out throughout the course of the season. But several teams are already 20% of the way through their schedule, given the fact that we're on a 60-game schedule in the regular season this year, and some teams may not even play that. So it's a balancing act between how do you not overreact to small sample sizes for teams and players who are off to really, really good or really, really bad starts, but also, you can't just say small sample size all season because, while it's true, it's also the season is passing by, and their overall numbers may not have a chance to balance out to the way that you might expect to regress either in a positive or negative way in a shortened season. So I decided to look at some of the leaderboards for teams and for players in terms of stats like OPS, runs scored, stolen bases, ERA, bullpens, starting pitchers, all sorts of things, WAR leaderboards, and pull out some interesting stats and see what we should make of them. Is it really concerning? Is it what we expected? Is it really encouraging? So we're going to go through a couple of those. Again, the full story is up at 110sportsmedia.com. We're not going to go through all of it. In a note as we get underway here to talk about some of these things, the stats and rankings that I have, I wrote this story yesterday, do not reflect yesterday's games, except where I will note that, of course, in a short season, even things that happen just in one day can change a team's ranking, a player's ranking in certain categories, but the overall point remains. If a player is off to a horrible start, then one great game yesterday isn't going to all of a sudden, lift all concerns from them. So we're going to go through some of these items here. Let's dive right in. The Cubs, I mentioned we would talk about them a little bit before. I mentioned we talk about them more in depth, and they're a really interesting team. Of course, they're off to a 10-2 start, which is incredible. The first NL team to reach 10 wins. They have the best starters ERA in baseball, but they're currently, now after last night's action, second worst bullpen ERA in Major League Baseball. It's really kind of incredible that a team with a 7.20, and that's accurate now, 7.20 ERA from its relievers, almost a run higher than the 29th ranked club, can be off to a 10-2 start. Craig Kimbrell, his disastrous 2019 year, which he got a late start, has carried over into this year. He has had 3 opportunities to pitch. None of them have gone particularly well. He just doesn't. He looks like Joe Pitcher at this point, and not the best closer of the last decade. So that's really a concern. But he's not the only concern for the Cubs and their bullpen. As of the writing of this story, when I wrote it yesterday, before yesterday's game, 6 other pitchers who've made multiple relief appearances for the Cubs had an ERA over 7. So that's really concerning for the Cubs. And if you had told me before the season started that 2 weeks in the Cubs would have a 7.20 bullpen ERA, given the other concerns I had about the Cubs, I would have thought, they're probably third in the NL Central, maybe around 500, or maybe a little, maybe they could overcome it and be a little bit better. But the idea that they could be way out in first place in the NL Central with a 10-2 record, first team to reach 10 wins in the NL despite a 7.20 ERA, would really have shocked me, because there were real concerns about the team's rotation as well coming into the year. I had concerns about them. I still have some concerns about them, and just in terms of the players that they're counting on, like John Lester, for instance, wearing down. He wasn't all that good last year, but he's been really good this year. And Cubs starters, when I wrote this, a 2.01 ERA this year, and then Yu Darvish went out last night, 7 innings, 1 earned run against the Royals. That dropped the team's rotation ERA down to 1.95, which is unbelievable, and that's just sensational. And that's not going to last, obviously. To what degree it's going to regress, I'm not sure. They've gotten outstanding performances from some of their young pitchers in the Cubs rotation who, there was question marks about, have fared well. So clearly clearly the starting pitching isn't going to last as it has, but they're going to need to figure out something in the bullpen. Of course, what has been impressive as expected is that Cubs offense. When I wrote this story, 7 players with multiple home runs on the Cubs. That offense is great. It's delivered as promised, generally speaking. Bryant, Rizzo, Baez, the whole crew, that team out to an outstanding start in the NL Central. They're clearly the favorites to win the NL Central at this point. I had picked the Reds, and I still am really high on the Reds, potentially making the playoffs. I'm checking right now, and actually the Cubs, in a 60-game season, that good of a start is really meaningful in jumping out. Typically a 10-2 start, well, really impressive, wouldn't necessarily be predictive of the whole year, but given the 60-game season, the 10-2 starts is really incredible, and it's going to be, it's going to be hard for a team to catch the Cubs, even though they're just 12 games into the season. Really good start for the Cubs. Corey Seager, and the second stat I want to talk about here. Corey Seager leads baseball in hard hit balls. After returning from Tommy John surgery last year, Seager, the Dodgers shortstop, didn't quite flash the power he has in the past, and of course he ended up taking a back seat in the limelight there to Cody Bellinger in his MVP season. But Seager's off to an incredible year, hitting .356 prior to yesterday's action, with a .408 on-base percentage, and reminding us just how incredible he is, that he really belongs amongst the top young shortstops in that class that includes Lindor and Story and others, and Correa and others. He really belongs as part of that group. So a hard hit ball is defined by MLB's StatCast, which is StatCast system, looks at some of these analytics and different things in baseball. A hard hit ball is defined as a ball having an exit velocity off the bat of 95 miles an hour or higher. And as you might expect, if you're hitting the ball frequently 95 miles an hour or harder, good things are going to happen. And Seager has 25 hard hit balls this season, which is 6 more than the second-ranked player. Basically, he's squaring the ball up really well. He's hitting it really hard. And there's plenty of attention on the Dodgers being paid to Mookie Betts and Cody Bellinger, as it should be. But the player to watch on the Dodgers this year might just be Corey Seager, whose hot start isn't obviously going to sustain at that rate, but it's backed up by the actual things that he's doing so far this year that the numbers that the deeper numbers in the analytics show us about his profile. Another interesting statistic that I found in looking through the leaderboards, the Indians, going into yesterday, had the second best ERA in baseball, but the worst batting average. And we knew Cleveland's pitching would be a strength. We didn't know it would be quite this good, though. Indian starters went at least 6 innings with 2 or fewer runs in 7 straight games to begin the year, which was only been accomplished by one other team in Major League Baseball since 1901. That was the 93 Braves, a team which had a rotation featuring 3 future Hall of Famers, I might add. On August 4th, a couple days ago, Shane Bieber brought his strikeout total to 35, which is the third most by any pitcher through his first 3 games of the season, dating back to 1893. And the team now with a 2.21 ERA that is updated from its pitchers, trailing only the Dodgers. The concern, though, for the Indians, and part of the reason why we're looking at a team with currently a 7-6 record, despite just incredible starting pitching, is an incredibly weak offense. Heading into yesterday's action, just 1.4 runs per game over their last week and a 183 batting average for the season. Francisco Lindor and Jose Ramirez, the team's star hitters, are hitting pretty well to begin the season. Lindor, 3 home runs, 8 RBI. Ramirez, 2 home runs, 6 RBI going into yesterday. But that's about it. Their outfield production has been pitiful. And that's not completely unexpected. I mean, that's something I talked about going into the season, that the Indians have those star hitters in Ramirez and Lindor, but the players around them, they don't have great complementary players. They didn't go out and spend money to get a veteran outfielder or somebody with a proven track record, and the players they have around them in that lineup are not very good. And so the Indians are going to be in it because of that great starting pitching, even if not that great, for the rest of the year, but I just really struggle to see them getting too far or having really any chance of surpassing the Twins, given the lack of depth in that lineup behind those 2 stars, something the Twins have plenty of in terms of hitting depth. A couple other interesting statistics I found in my research for this. Lance Lynn, and this is still true, he leads MLB starters in ERA. It took him 19 innings before he gave up his first earned run of the year. Currently a 0.49 ERA, leads all qualified starters. He's in his mid-30s now. He's entering his mid-30s, and Lynn has emerged as one of the best pitchers in baseball this year. And I believe generally what I'm seeing from Lynn, obviously he's not going to post a 0.49 ERA, because this is a continuation of something that he had started last year. Last season he posted a 16-11 record, a 3.67 ERA, career high 246 strikeouts. And he actually made a change which seems to have some changes which seem to have resulted in this newfound dominance. He changed his positioning on the mound. He increased his fastball usage while decreasing his off-speed pitch usage, which is not a typical thing you see as a formula for success, but for him, that those couple of changes seem to have made a big difference. And he, in his mid-30s, I think we can definitively say at this point, right now, is one of the best pitchers in Major League Baseball. Not the best, not in the conversation for the absolute best, but he's an ace pitching for the Rangers this year. A few other quick notes for you that I found interesting. Christian Yelich of the Brewers is off to a very, very bad start. He's tied, as of the writing of this story, which was heading into yesterday, and he didn't play last night, he was tied for the worst WAR value, which is his wins above replacement value in baseball. WAR sort of is it, without getting into all the details, there's different ways to measure it. Generally, it's measuring how a player compares to, it compares in providing wins for their team relative to the average replacement player who may come in to take their place if they weren't there. So Yelich, last couple of years, 7.3 WAR and 7.0 WAR in his last 2 seasons. Of course, he won the MVP 2 years ago. This year, through the first 8 games that he's played for the Brewers, a negative .6 WAR. Tied with Hunter Pence entering yesterday for the worst mark of any Major League hitter. He looks completely lost at the plate right now, and the team gave him a day off yesterday, but while he's returning from having knee surgery, so at the end of last year, there's just really no reason to suspect anything's wrong with him. This guy has proven to be, Yelich, one of the best hitters in baseball over the past couple of seasons, if not the best he may have been by the numbers the best pure hitter in baseball, overall hitter in baseball in the past couple of years. So while it's concerning in some sense that he's off to such a bad start, really the worst stretch of his career in terms of a slump, there's just no evidence to support that he won't figure this out. There's nothing to point at and say, well, I think he's broken because of X, Y, Z. He looks lost at the plate right now, but I really just don't see any reason to be too concerned about Christian Yelich. One final note here. I had a couple of other interesting ones, and we'll leave some, of course, which you can read in the full story at 110sportsmedia.com. One interesting one, I'm just going to go through one more here, and that's the Arizona Diamondbacks, who entering yesterday were last in baseball in home runs with 3 times fewer than the 29th ranked team. Heading into yesterday, 36 MLB players had more home runs than the Diamondbacks team, which is weird because this was a team we expected to have some pretty decent power. Last season, 6 Arizona players had more than 15 homers, 3 had basically 30 or more, and then they added in the offseason outfielders Starling Marte and Cole Calhoun. They hit 23 and 33 homers, respectively, last year. So the personnel was there for the Diamondbacks to get off to a pretty good start and be an above average offensive team, and they had just 2 home runs entering last night. But apparently I may have me writing about how bad they've been. I may have been a good jinx, I suppose. So last night they scored 14 runs against the Astros, getting home runs from Cole Calhoun, an inside the park home run, from Nick Ahmed, from David Peralta, and from Eduardo Escobar. Maybe that's the jolt they need to get that offense going. This was a team I thought could be really interesting as a sneaky playoff pick. The Diamondbacks, that pitching staff, though, Gallen looks really good. Zach Gallen, Madison Bumgarner, player I was concerned about coming into the year, does not look good at all. But I expect I could really see with that offense them making things interesting, at least in the weeks ahead for the Diamondbacks. So again, those are just some interesting leaderboard stats standouts I found from the beginning of the season, and sort of what you might think of them, how much to take from them. There are a couple more on this in the story on the website, which is titled Leaderboard Watch: Making Sense of Early MLB Statistical Standouts. You can find that on the website. I dive into Nelson Cruz's incredible start with the Twins, the Padres' success at scoring runs so far this season, Nick Castellanos' apparent breakout, it looks like, with the Reds, and the White Sox' strong offensive start. You can read about that right now on the story. Again, it's up at 110sportsmedia.com. All right, we're going to go ahead and take our final break of the show. When we come back, as promised, go through a couple odds and ends, a feel-good story to end the show, and a quick look at what's on deck, what I'm looking at as being interesting series to watch and storylines to watch over the weekend. Stay with us. A little bit more to come here on the show. You're watching ATB Live from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back to ATB Live from 110 Sports. I'm Chris Brown. Thanks for tuning in on this Thursday or whenever you're watching or listening to the show on live on the 110 Sports Network or on 110sportsmedia.com after the fact on our YouTube channel or on Spotify or Apple Podcasts where you can listen to all 110 Sports Network shows on demand. Thank you for making us part of your day today. As promised, a couple of an interesting story, an uplifting story to end the broadcast today. We talked a couple weeks ago about, actually, we talked about it multiple times, the incredible comeback story of Colorado Rockies reliever Daniel Bard, who one time back in the early 2010s had been a shutdown reliever for the Boston Red Sox, and then it fell apart. He had the yips, and he was out of Major League Baseball for several years. He became a coach in the Diamondbacks organization, and it looked like that was it for his baseball playing career. And then Bard was able to make it back into the majors this year with the Colorado Rockies after signing a minor league deal. And he's been incredible. So far this year, Bard, a 2.70 ERA in 5 games, 2 earned runs in 6 2/3 innings with 7 strikeouts and no walks. It's been an incredible comeback story. But one thing that's really interesting as well is that there's another pretty much equally interesting comeback story with a lot of similar characteristics in the Braves organization, and that comes from another reliever in Tyler Matzek, left-hander who wasn't out of the majors quite as long as Bard, but his comeback, he also had the yips, basically as impressive. He's 29 years old. He hadn't appeared in the majors since 2015. He's now on the Braves roster, and he's opened the season with 5 1/3 scoreless innings, 9 strikeouts, no walks. Again, the similarities here are really interesting. He was a highly regarded prospect picked by the Rockies 11th overall in the 2009 draft. And that's the draft which Steven Strasburg went 1 and Mike Trout went 25th. So this guy was picked above Mike Trout in the 2009 draft. And Matzek was a largely successful reliever. He didn't have quite the dominance that Bard had as far as looking like a closer in waiting, but he had been a productive pitcher, and then it all fell off the map for him. He lost his control. He dealt with the yips as well, and he got signed to a minor league contract by the Braves last August after he'd been released by the Diamondbacks and returned to Independent League. And when he was at the Diamondbacks at last year's spring training, he was with the organization where the mental skills coach for that team was Daniel Bard. So really fascinating story here. Tyler Matzek started last year pitching for the Texas Air Hogs of the Independent American Association, trying to make it back into affiliated baseball. He has, and he's off to an incredible start with the Braves. A key part of that bullpen, 5 1/3 scoreless innings for Matzek to begin the year. It's a really fascinating story. There's a lot more information on it. Story from David O'Brien in The Athletic. I would encourage you to check that out. So 2 incredible stories of players coming back after several years out of the majors, relievers who had battled the yips, who are back this year, who have a connection, who know each other, who had worked together. Really fascinating story there for Tyler Matzek. All right, and we'll end the show here today on this Thursday. As we always do on Thursdays, with a look at what's on deck and some interesting storylines to follow and games to follow into the weekend. Right now, we have our first game of the day on this Thursday. It's underway between the team tied for the best record in baseball and the team with the worst record in baseball. The 10-2 Twins are playing the 2-10 Pirates right now. The Twins in the first inning are already up 3-0. If they go to 11-2, that would certainly be something. In more exciting matchups as far as 2 competitive teams, the Yankees are taking on the Tampa Bay Rays in Tampa Bay in Florida this weekend. Meanwhile, the Braves are set to take on the Phillies. The Cubs will be playing in St. Louis, of course, assuming all that goes well with the Cardinals receiving negative tests. The Cubs have 2 times as many wins as the Cardinals have games played at this point. So we'll see how that goes. That's, of course, always a rivalry game. Hopefully that game does get to take place. Then we've got the Giants and the Dodgers, and of course, always a rivalry game playing in Los Angeles. And an interesting one is the Astros play in Oakland, taking on the Athletics this weekend. The A's lead that division right now. The Astros really banged up on the pitching front. The A's are off to a good start. Always excited about the A's, so that's going to be fun to watch this weekend as well. We'll, of course, be back Tuesday to update you on the situation involving COVID-19 in baseball. Again, the plan is that tomorrow all 30 teams will play for the first time in 2 weeks. Fingers crossed that does get to happen. So that is going to do it for today's episode of Around the Bases. A couple reminders for you. The 110 Sports, our live network coverage, continues with the J Mole Show with Josh Molnick's tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern. And then again on Monday at the same time, Touchline Talk with Josh Doring back with you at 11 Eastern on Tuesday. And then we're back with you on ATB Live at 1 Eastern on Tuesday afternoon. All our shows, again, available on demand, 110sportsmedia.com. Click on the video tab, also YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Check out all the latest written content up on the website right now. We've got NBA, soccer, Major League Baseball, NFL coverage, plenty of coverage on the website in written content. And when you're on the website, you can also subscribe to our newsletter on the right side of the homepage. Put that in there. You'll get the latest 110 Sports written content, links to our podcasts, including Jays for Days and the new Bonfire podcast, as well as our written content, like I said, and links to our broadcasts as well. Subscribe to the newsletter. That'll hit your inbox every Friday morning. So as always, thanks for watching. Stay safe, and I will talk to you on Tuesday.